Live at 5 from the RT News Centre here in Moscow, we talk on camera to a man whose alleged off-camera account became the basis for media speculation into why MH17 crashed in Ukraine. Negotiations on Iran's nuclear program will go down to the wire. It's still unclear again this hour if the diplomats can hammer out a deal. We'll bring you the latest. The US says it's planning to splash out $5 billion on orbital defences now to keep the upper hand in space warfare. Hello, my name's Kevin Owen. Thanks for being with RT International, wherever around the world you're watching. Our top story then, the probe into the crash of Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 has resumed, with Dutch investigators back on site. The cause is still yet to be officially determined, but that's not preventing some media from generating their own versions of what happened. One of the most recent comes from the Reuters news agency, which talked to witnesses in a village near the crash scene. Now, here's an extract from that article.
When interviewed by Reuters, Fedotov, the witness who described the wiggling rocket, at first said on camera that it was fired from territory held by the Ukrainian army. Later, off camera, he said it was launched from a nearby rebel area. Asked why he had originally said the opposite, he said it was because he was afraid of the rebels.
Well, some serious allegations there, and ones which are being disputed by the quoted witness himself. We went to the Lugansk region to hear from him in person. Now, the way he says his words were portrayed in the Reuters piece has made him wary of journalists, but he eventually agreed to speak to our correspondent, Ilya Petrenko.
Когда за Боинг мы разговаривали, как было, я ему так сказал. А вот это вот без камеры, там всю эту мутату, которую он уже сам придумал, это ложь, потому что я без камеры вообще на эту тему мы не разговаривали. Мы просто разговаривали о жизни. Если статья выходит, как бы хотя бы ознакомил, что... А так без моего согласия... Даже не, ну, хотя бы наброски там какие-то дал.
It turned out that the Reuters correspondent did contact Mr. Fedotov after their interview, but not to talk about the article.
Первым, что он спросил, нет ли у меня неприятностей. Я был удивлен этим. От чего у меня могут быть неприятности, если я такого, как сказать, то, что было, я сказал. А когда уже мне позвонили друзья и сказали, что где-то на каком-то канале они видели и сказали, что я сказал на камеру одно, а после камеры сказал противоположное. Вот это я тогда уже понял, почему он у меня так спросил. Это его домыслы, или ему так было выгодно, и я не знаю, какую он цель преследовал.
The official investigation into the MH17 tragedy led by Dutch experts is still ongoing. A conclusive report is expected to be released later this year. The investigators are appealing to the media not to speculate on the downing of MH17 in East Ukraine until the final document is published.
Well, furthermore, RT contacted Reuters to ask if there was any solid proof that different things were said on and off camera, but we've got no response from them. The article's also drawn criticism from the Russian Foreign Ministry, which accused the report for distorting the facts. And it's not the first time the media's gone out on a limb with their own conclusions. In the past few months, reports that prosecutors had officially confirmed that flight MH17 was downed by a Russian missile circulated in some Western and Ukrainian media outlets. So again, RT contacted the source of it, the Dutch investigator's own office, for confirmation on whether this was said or not. Well, that was the wrong clip there, of course. We'll try and bring you that clip, but basically they denied it. Let's tell you now about the World Affairs correspondent, Neil Clark. That's the guy you just saw there. He told us that being lax on fact-checking is nothing new to a lot of Western media. We'll hear what he had to say, then we'll go back to that other clip we're about to show. Let's hear Neil Clark now.
We only can think back at the headline of the Rupert Murdoch-owned newspaper, The Sun, the day after the tragic MH17 disaster, and the headline was Putin's missile. No evidence at all. It was implying that this was a missile that had been personally made and fired by President Putin. That's the kind of low level of reporting, so-called reporting, that's been going on in the Western media. So it's very sad, really. Journalistic standards have slipped to a great deal. It's been propaganda instead of facts. I mean, it's facts that we want. You know, we should want to know the full truth about what happened to this plane and who actually, what brought it down. But it seems that a lot of people in the West were only interested in this story as a means of blaming Russia in order to justify more sanctions on Russia. That's their only interest in the story. They're not interested really in finding out what happened. They're only interested in using it in their campaign to demonize Russia.
Well, unfortunately, we couldn't go back to that clip. If you're watching in previous hours, you'll know that the Dutch investigators there said that there was no conclusive evidence at all at this stage that Russia was involved, or indeed it was a Russian rocket. So they completely denied everything that we heard earlier on there. And we're waiting for the official outcome of that report. And we'll try and bring you that clip so you can hear it yourself next hour again. OK, the other big news today, a former advisor to Iran's negotiating team believes enough progress has been made to finally get a deal in place there.
Mr. Lavrov, are you optimistic that we'll get a deal? Are you optimistic that we'll get a deal?
I'm not paid to be optimistic.
I'll stay with RT as more details emerge from Lausanne as the clock ticks to Tuesday's deadline. We've got a few technical problems this end, as you can probably work out at the moment. There's a lot of negotiations going on in Lausanne at the moment. That deadline to those talks just 24 hours away now, the 31st of March. There is some optimism there. We've got a whole series of reports to show you on that. Yes, and I can now tell you we can do that. You can see why they've been pulling out all the stops. It's now been 18 months of tortuous negotiations just to get the sides to where they are now. And they've already missed 2 other deadlines as well. For Iran, a deal would signal the end of 9 years of sanctions and isolation, so it's incredibly important to them that they get something positive out of this. RT's Daniel Bushell is following the talks then in Lausanne. Here he is.
3 issues haven't yet been resolved. One Western diplomat here is reported to have said, first, how long any deal will last. Second, the procedure for lifting sanctions from Iran. And third, any renewal of sanctions if Tehran breaks the agreement. Reporters are milling inside and around the hotel where negotiations have entered the end game, in the words of German Foreign Minister Steinmeier. Participants rushing from one negotiating room to the next. Today, all sides met together for an hour and a half. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov then had a working lunch with Steinmeier and met other sides before a return to Moscow. Lavrov's deputy called talks intensive, adding everyone is, quote, determined to reach a deal by tomorrow's deadline, which the sides have set for a preliminary deal. With these problems up in the air, some of the sides may now fly home before returning to Lausanne on Thursday, diplomats here say. US Secretary Kerry had already once postponed his return to the States to get a deal done, so Tuesday's deadline may now be missed.
Obviously has a deadline tomorrow night.
These are certainly the most positive talks on Iran in years. Diplomats often sharing a smile or a laugh together, if sometimes a nervous one. As negotiations continue, we'll be following developments throughout the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I was saying just now, a former advisor to Iran's negotiating team believes enough progress has been made to finally get a deal in place. At least that's how he's seeing it.
Based on the information that I'm receiving, there are still some remaining differences with respect to the sequence and timeline for the removal of sanctions, as well as some other technical issues such as the R&D for the centrifuges and the fate of the Fordo underground facility. But I really think that the progress has reached to the point that we are very likely to see a breakthrough. It's a very crucial multilateral meeting, and I'm very optimistic that we will see a deal that could take the form either of a 2-page statement or of an oral agreement, and I'm not sure which one.
So keeping a close eye on that. Now, plenty more ahead for you, including how the Saudi-led offensive in Yemen is claiming success. Sorry about that. While the wider Arab League plans a joint military force to carry out future interventions and maybe counter Iran's regional influence, we'll take a look at that a little later on. Plus, too, France's ruling party is licking its wounds after taking a hit in key local elections. It's a turnaround for the right-wing parties who are celebrating. Hope you can stay with us as we'll be covering that. Right, hopefully back on track now. From classic Star Wars to modern-day Guardians of the Galaxy, the perils of space have fired the imagination of movie directors for decades, haven't they?
Explorer's been hit. Explorer, do you read? We never quit!
Well, science fiction could become science fact, and sooner than you might think. This is why.
The threat in space, I fundamentally believe, is a real one. It's been demonstrated. So we have to be ready for any campaign that extends its way into space.
Well, that's because the US is planning to splash out up to $5 billion on orbital defense. One of the key reasons behind the spending spree, according to Washington, is a potential threat from China. Now, reports of at least 3 anti-satellite tests have in the country have sparked fears in the US. That's what sparked it. You're supposed to see some dates there, but they have happened. Bruce Gagnon from the Global Network Against Weapons believes Beijing is developing tools capable of bringing down US satellites, but they pose no immediate threat, he thinks. That's the crucial bit. Oh, those are the dates, by the way.
I don't think China immediately is a threat to U.S. satellites, but I do believe that China is developing the capability to be able to knock out a U.S. military satellite in times of warfare. The United States is absolutely reliant on the eyes in the sky and military satellites to fight its wars today. China is aware of that. And so China is trying to develop that capability in a way could back off the United States.
Well, as a matter of fact, Washington has quite an anti-satellite program of its own. Again, look at some relevant dates. See, America first successfully destroyed a satellite back in 1985, more recently in 2008. And if you thought that Washington's space race ambitions were over, think again. The US has its eye firmly on the competition and it's afraid of losing the advantage. Bruce Gagnon again thinks America's looking for any reason to satisfy its ongoing military expansion.
The United States and Israel at the United Nations are blocking a treaty called Prevention of an Arms Race in Outer Space that is annually introduced by China and Russia. So clearly the United States resists the development of new treaties at the United Nations because they don't want to be inhibited. They don't want to be stopped from taking full control of space.